Thank you. It is my pleasure to introduce Dr. James Croft, who will discuss, does ethical culture have a future?
Thank you, Samantha. There we go. Good morning, everyone. I'm going to step away from this just to make sure. Is my mic actually working? Okay, good. So firstly, thank you so much for that beautiful music. It was absolutely perfect to set us up in the right mind space for having this conversation. And thank you to Samantha for sharing. You're so poised and dignified when you do it, and I love it. I want to thank you too, Gabriel, for those opening words. They were absolutely lovely. Thank you for everything that you've given to our community over the months you've been with us. You know, ethical societies were founded to be places where people of all religions and none could come together to aspire to the common good of humanity. And we don't often see a reflection of that from our podium, but Gabriel's presence here has helped us all live into that aspiration a little bit more, and I thank you so much for everything you've given to us. I want to acknowledge that today is special for at least two reasons. Firstly, because it is Mothering Sunday, so I want to express my love and respect to everyone who takes the role of mother in anybody's life. We appreciate and respect you at the Ethical Society of St. Louis, and to me, the important role of mothers in our society seems particularly important right now as we face the potential overturn of Roe versus Wade and the rollback of rights to bodily autonomy and reproductive justice that decision would represent. I want to reaffirm today our support as a community, which has been many decades long, and as a movement, to the rights of all people, whether or not to become and to remain pregnant, which is a bedrock liberty without which a person's dignity is traduced. Today is also special because we are joined from members of ethical societies from all across the country. Hello to everyone joining us on Altar. It's a delight to have so many of you with us. When we first had the idea of convening this conversation, I had no idea how it would turn out, but the fact that so many of you have joined us today demonstrates that there's a need for us to talk about the future of this movement and reconnect with why we do this work, and to honestly grapple with the challenges which we face and which face our communities so that we can chart a better path forward together. I want to start with a story. It's March 2022, 2 years after the onset of COVID, and I'm sitting at home with my husband, Colton. We're watching television, almost certainly one of the uber-British TV shows he likes, probably Antiques Roadshow or Downton Abbey, if I would have to guess. Sometimes I think that Colton is more British than I am. And he turns to me and says, "We have to talk." Yeah, everybody here knows that nothing which comes after the words, "we have to talk," is going to be good. So now I'm bracing myself, thinking, uh-oh, what have I done? You know, I'm racking my brain to think of all the things I could have said wrong or could have forgotten to do. And Colton proceeds to tell me, "You know I love you and I care about you. I know that COVID has been very difficult to live through, but you're not taking care of yourself. You don't have good routines. You're working far too much. You bring your work home with you. You're busy and frustrated all the time. You aren't fun to live with. I need you to take better care of yourself." And that was difficult to hear. My first instinct was to feel defensive. I'm okay. I'm doing my best. This is a difficult time for everyone. My second instinct was to feel aggressive. Well, you aren't always that fun to live with either. But after I sat with my emotions for a while, taking time to process what he was saying, I realized that Colton was right. He was pointing out real problems with the way I was living. problems which were affecting him too, and while my feelings were understandable, his analysis was correct and it was offered from a place of love. He told me something that he knew would be difficult for me to hear because he loved me enough to be honest. That mic's not on. You know what? I think I'm going to switch to the podium mic if that's okay, Jake. This one is just echoing too much for me. Are we good? Wow, even that one's echoing. There we go. That story I have just told you is a metaphor. Today, I am going to be Colton, and the ethical culture movement is going to be me. I love our movement. It gave me my career, my calling, my sense of purpose in life. From the first moment I visited the New York Society for Ethical Culture, stepped out onto the beautiful stage they had and saw that amazing temple to the highest human values, I knew my life would be about helping people make meaning and become who they want to be. The 8 years that I have spent serving the Ethical Society of St. Louis have been a privilege and an honor. And it is because I love this movement and believe in what ethical culture can offer the world that I am today going to be honest and say, ethical culture, you are not taking care of yourself. Let's start with some facts. Ours is a truly tiny congregational movement. We have just 23 congregations with a total membership of 1,786 people. So just to give you a sense of how small that is, the capacity of Busch Stadium, our local baseball stadium here in St. Louis, is 63,400. So doing some quick mental math in my head that I totally didn't prepare earlier, that means we could fit our entire movement inside that stadium 35 times before we would fill it. So let's say that's too big a venue for us. Let's say instead we got every member of every ethical society in the world together to see a concert at The Pageant, which is a local concert venue here in town. Perhaps we could see Jesus Christ Supercar, which is on this weekend. I think we missed it, actually. I think it was yesterday. We wouldn't even fill the venue. We are tiny. Now, small isn't necessarily bad. Small movements can do big things, and we've never been a particularly big movement, even at our height. The problem is we are tiny and shrinking. The 1786 members we have today is less than half the 4,918 members we had in 1969. And the trend line is steadily downward. I've actually plotted the membership of our movement on a graph, and I'm afraid it is depressing. Here you can see, you won't be able to read the key, but I'll tell you what's on the graph. The membership of our movement from 1970 to 2020 plotted in 5-year increments. Now, when I look at a graph like that, I can't help but wonder how long we have left. I want to ask, if we project the rate of our movement's decline into the future, how long will it be until there's no ethical culture movement left at all? These are the things that occur to me when I look at a graph. I am, at heart, a huge nerd. And the answer is that we are losing, on average, 60 people every year, meaning that at our current rate of loss, in less than 30 years, if that is not altered, there will be no ethical culturists left. Now, of course, that's not how it happens. I think it unlikely that all our ethical societies will be gone in 30 years. In fact, in some ways, what is likely to happen is actually worse. The sad truth is that congregations don't die when they reach 0 members. Congregations die when the number of active members they have is not enough to support the continuation of the community. To give one recent example from our own movement, the Boston Ethical Society, which was dear to me because it was the first ethical society I ever visited, died in 2018. And in its final membership report, they said they had 61 members. Congregations don't die when they reach 0 members. They die when they can't sustain themselves anymore, or they limp on without having much impact on the world. And because of this, my suspicion is that at least a few of our societies are on the verge of death already, and that it will take much less than 30 years to see our movement shrink dramatically. Another worrying truth is that membership in our movement is incredibly lopsided. A vast percentage of our members are concentrated in a tiny number of societies. I've made a graph for that too. You won't be able to see the key on this graph. Society names are down below the pie chart here, and the pie chart shows the percentage of the movement's total membership that each society encompasses. The important thing to take away is the overall picture. Most of our members are concentrated in a tiny proportion of our communities. Consider my own society, this one, since it's the one I know best. Our membership, which has certainly taken a hit because of COVID and was bigger a couple of years ago, accounts for about 19% of the entire ethical culture movement. Almost 1 in 5 of all ethical culture people are members here in St. Louis. The Washington Ethical Society is roughly the same at about 18% of the movement. Then there's New York at about 10% and Bergen at about 9%. So if you add all that together, 56% of our movement, more than half of all our members, are members of just 4 ethical societies. Now, why is that a problem? It's not because there's anything inherently wrong with small congregations. There are fantastic small ethical societies in our movement. Size is not the same as health. But it is true that research into congregational development suggests that smaller congregations are both less attractive to the average spiritual seeker than large ones, and that it is harder to grow smaller communities than large ones. According to a 2020 study from Faith Communities Today, the overwhelming percentage of actual churchgoers in America, 7 out of 10 of them, are members of large churches, congregations with 251 members or more. That is what you can see on the bottom line of that graph. 70% of the people in 10% of the congregations. People like large communities. They like to be around a lot of people. And at the same time, it's harder to grow smaller congregations. The same study showed a very clear connection between congregational size and congregational growth. I'm showing here an image of 6 pie charts showing the growth rates of churches of different sizes. And down in the bottom right, we have the biggest congregations. Those are ones with more than 1,500 members. And the size of the blue segment in that pie is the percentage of those large churches growing 5% or more a year. And then as you move left and back up, the church sizes get smaller, and you see the size of that blue segment shrinks, and the red segment showing the congregations which have declined in size by 5% or more grows. Larger churches tend to grow faster than smaller ones. And that means our movement is in a bad position in at least 2 ways. Most of our congregations are of a size which most people don't want to join, And it is also those smaller congregations that find it harder to attract new members and grow. And I think that's a big challenge, which we should be honest about, alongside our sheer tininess, which causes its own problems. Now, many members of the movement I've spoken to, when faced with these considerations, respond in one of two ways. They either say, size isn't everything, or I'm glad one person laughed at least, or they point out that most religious movements are experiencing a decline in attendance, and that we are merely following that trend as well. And to an extent, I agree with both of these responses. Size isn't everything. As I've said, the size of a congregation is not the same as its health. It's possible to build wonderful, warm, effective, small congregational communities, and some of our ethical societies are like that. I'm not down on small congregations per se. Nor do I believe that membership growth should be the most important metric by which we measure our success. Ethical societies don't exist just to be as big as possible. We have a broader purpose than that. But this idea that size isn't everything is too often misused to draw attention away from the real point. No one who is worried about the decline of our movement thinks that size is all important. Instead, we recognize that the purpose of ethical societies is to serve people, to serve our members, and to serve the community at large. And the more people who are members of our congregations, the more we can serve, both within and outside our communities. If we believe that ethical culture societies offer something important which the world needs, and I certainly believe that, and I presume you all believe that, which is why you came here today, then surely we want more people to find us, which will mean our communities will grow. If we believe our communities have a positive impact on the towns and cities in which they're situated, then surely we want to see more ethical societies planted, which will draw more people to them. The size of our movement is not all important, but it is important because it acts as a limiter on the positive impact we can have on the world. And if you doubt this, just think to yourself, when there are no ethical societies and no members of the ethical movement, how much good will we do for the world then? As for the second response, it is of course true that religious participation is declining overall in the United States. Gallup reported just last year that US church membership had fallen below a majority of Americans for the very first time in this nation's history. And church attendance has been declining even faster. So yes, religious participation, along with all other kinds of civic participation, has been in steep decline. And if that has been happening to all religious movements, some say, why not to ethical culture as well? But this explanation doesn't work for me either, for one simple reason. A major driver of the decline of participation in religious gatherings is the changing nature of people's religious beliefs. Alongside a decline in congregational participation, we've seen a dramatic decline in religious affiliation. More and more people now identify as non-religious. So many that the fastest growing religious demographic in the USA for years has been none. Now you tell me, in a nation in which more and more people are stepping away from traditional religious beliefs, would you expect a movement such as ours, which provides community for exactly those sorts of people, to shrink or to grow? The truth is that one of the main reasons church participation is declining is because cultural winds are blowing against them. But a headwind for them is a tailwind for us. We should be growing because the population of people who might be interested in what we have to offer is dramatically growing. To put it in mercenary terms, the market for our product is growing, but fewer people are buying it. And that means that we are doing something wrong. But if these arguments don't persuade you that our smallness and lack of growth is a problem, maybe this one will. The simple fact is that the one thing I hear over and over again from our members in St. Louis and from members of ethical societies that I visit all over the country is that they want to grow. Our members overwhelmingly want our movement to be bigger. Growth has been a strategic priority of the American Ethical Union for years. Ethical society members want us to be a more powerful and influential movement. And I want that too. I think they're right to want that. But we have to face the fact that that's not happening, and it hasn't been happening for 50 years. We are tiny and shrinking, even in a religious climate that is more hospitable than ever to our beliefs. And I think we're not doing enough to turn that around. Now, that's difficult to hear. Of course it is. But we have to accept it if we want to change the situation. All the church growth literature, all of that I've encountered anyway, which talks about how congregations die, says that the number one thing which will lead to the death of a community is the unwillingness of the existing members to recognize they have a problem. And I think that applies to our movement as well. For our surrounding culture to be trending so swiftly and dramatically in our direction, but for our societies to stay so small and remain shrinking, we are doing something wrong. And we have to accept that fact and search for new solutions. And that, in fact, is my first point in my 3-point plan to save ethical culture. Accept that we have a problem. Yes, I'm going to illustrate all of these 3 points with those incredibly annoying motivational quote posters. I don't know who Zig Ziglar was, but they are right. You cannot solve a problem until you acknowledge that you have one and accept responsibility for solving it. That's the first step. And probably emotionally, actually, that's the most difficult step. This is the place where a lot of members in a lot of ethical societies around the country get stuck. We're not willing to admit we have a problem. Once we've accepted that we have a problem, the second point should actually be easier to implement. We need to learn from the people who do this well. Here is another inspirational Zig Ziglar quote. I've become a fan. If you are not willing to learn, no one can help you. If you are determined to learn, no one can stop you. He was quite a guy, it seems. Building and growing congregational communities is extremely difficult. But it is, at least to some degree, a science. It is a learnable set of skills which we could learn and apply if we choose to do so. And I remember vividly when I learned this myself. I was visiting Colorado for a convention, a gay choral convention, actually, which is pretty much the best thing ever. And I took the opportunity to connect with a friend who had grown up there. And as a child, they had attended the church of Christian pastor Ted Haggard. Now, I heard some people groan, so some people know who that is. Haggard is the founder and former pastor of New Life Church in Colorado, an absolutely enormous conservative evangelical megachurch. And if you recognize his name, it's probably because he became infamous when in 2006 it was revealed he had for 3 years been doing crystal meth while being massaged by a male sex worker. Yeah. Not a good look for a conservative evangelical pastor. He was not just fired from his position, but banished from Colorado Springs in disgrace. There was literally a requirement in his severance package saying that he had to leave the city. Yet in 2010, just 4 years later, Haggard was back in Colorado Springs and had opened a new church. And because my friend had grown up in Haggard's megachurch, despite now being an atheist, she wanted to visit the new place just to see what it was like. And she asked me to go with her. So we drove to this big warehouse/aircraft hangar in which his church was meeting and attended a service led by the man himself. And it was full of people, including, I have to note, a suspiciously high proportion of handsome young men. But I also noticed that his church was huge. If it was an ethical society, it would easily already have been the biggest in the world. And he built it in just 2 years after literally having been banished from the state because of a gay sex and drug scandal. And I remember thinking to myself, if Ted Haggard can come back from a scandal like that to build a congregation like this, then it must be a set of skills. Yes, he has a sort of scary, manic charisma. And yes, I'm sure he started with lots of money. But there must also be a set of church planting and church growth practices which he is applying and which accounts for his ability to grow a massive megachurch in the first place and his ability to come back from something like that and build a thriving community in just 2 years. And since then, I've learned that indeed, yes, there are such skills. There is a very large literature on church growth and church planting. And while much of it is couched in Christian language, pretty much all of it is based in very sound psychology. And it could be put to use in our own congregations. But in my experience, most of our societies don't have the mechanisms to seek out this literature, sometimes the willingness, honestly, and to put its insights into practice. Sometimes I suspect we're even averse to learning the skills we need to achieve the goals we want because we worry that a lot of them come from traditional religious communities. But as our old friend Zig Ziglar says, if you're not willing to learn, no one can help you. I want us to become a movement willing to learn everything it can about building successful communities, including from those whose religious values we do not share. We are, after all, supposed to be a movement of rational people who believe in science and evidence, so let's follow the evidence of what works and learn from the people who are good at building community. And that brings me to the third and final point of my plan, and the third and final motivational quote from good old Zig Ziglar, and I particularly like this one because he almost certainly never said that, or he definitely didn't originate it. We must become more creative. It is a constant source of puzzlement to me that our movement has the potential to be more creative than almost any other congregational movement, but tends not to be. We have the luxury of having no set liturgy that we have to follow, no scripture we have to read from, no required structure of our gatherings or of our communities, no popes or bishops to tell us what to do. Effectively, each individual ethical society is free to hold our meetings however we want, and yet many, including my own, have settled on quite a traditional structure for our main Sunday meeting. We welcome people, there's maybe a bit of music, there's a talk, some more music, maybe some sharing, coffee afterward. Any member of a mainline Christian denomination visiting many of our ethical societies around the country would feel immediately at home with the broad structure of our proceedings. And given that we can do literally anything we want, isn't that a bit odd?
I find this especially weird given the fact that many successful contemporary religious congregations do not do that anymore. When you next have the chance to visit a local evangelical megachurch, do it. I'm serious. Do it. I love visiting these places. Do it and take a note of how they structure a contemporary worship service. You'll find probably that most of it is singing. It is more singing than anything else. The music will continue throughout the service, sometimes even while the minister is speaking, to highlight particular points and to create an emotional tone. The sermon is maybe 15 minutes long. It's very simple, lots of images, lots of interaction with the audience. It's designed for emotional impact over intellectual rigor. The whole thing is a seamless aesthetic experience. The music, the lighting, the staging, all reinforcing the central message. If you tune out the theology, right, if you don't listen to anything they're actually saying, the production is actually quite amazing. Now, I'm certainly not saying that we should transform our ethical societies so they look like evangelical megachurches. It was like, thank goodness. I'm well aware that many of our existing members would hate that. Nor am I saying there's no creativity in what we do. I do see examples of exciting creativity in our movement. But I am saying that we can draw from a wider set of inspirations and we can learn something from the extraordinary innovation that other religious communities are showing and from the care and attention they put in to every aspect of their gatherings. I think if we're honest, we can't say that we're as creative as we might be in finding ways to spread the ethical culture message. Those are my 3 proposals, my 3 challenges. Accept we have a problem. Learn from the community building experts. Be more creative. Are you willing to do those 3 things? I'm asking you bluntly because your answer to that question will determine whether ethical culture has a future. If we keep doing what we are doing, it will not have a future. Not at least a future worth wanting. If we are willing to change what we do, not what we believe in or the values that we cherish, but what we do in our communities to uphold and spread those values, then maybe we have a chance. And that's why I invited you here today. I love this movement. It has given me a sense of purpose. Serving this ethical society has been a privilege of my life. And it is because I love it, I am willing to say we are not taking care of it. The future of ethical culture is up to us. And the question is, will you join me in fighting for it? If you are willing to do that, we have 3 other programs later on today that you can join, each one designed to target one of the 3 issues that I have just raised. They start at 2 p.m. You can find them on the Ethical Society's Zoom. I know that a lot of people have other plans, but if you're available, please come along. And each one will tackle one of those 3 challenges. We'll have an opportunity for people to share about why they care about ethical culture, what makes them a member of one of our communities, so we can reconnect with our core values and honestly explore why we do the work we do and why we think it's important to the world. That will be facilitated by my good friend Chris Stedman, who has spoken here before and is a voice from outside our movement who's going to be able to create a safe space for everyone to share honestly how they're feeling right now. In response to the second question, learning from the community building experts, I'll be leading a workshop on how to use a framework to evaluate our programs. Because one of the things I've found in many of the ethical societies that I visit is that we don't have clear structures to evaluate if what we're doing is working. And until we put those structures in place, we're not going to change what we're doing to make things better. And then finally, my friend Daniel Lev Shkolnik is going to be giving a workshop about secular rituals. He is a specialist in creating very interesting and unique secular rituals, and he's going to talk about that to try and spur some of our creativity and to give us sort of ideas about how we might think differently about how we gather. I hope to see some of you there at 2 p.m. today, and also after this platform, where we'll have at least half an hour to talk about what has been said and to express what you have to say. I'm sure people have a lot to say. And also we'll be able to take questions and comments online. We have a whole system set up for that. And I am willing to stay from like 11 till 12 if people want to stay and talk about it right here in this room so that we can really air our feelings. Thank you for listening to me today, and I hope to see you later this afternoon. Okay. There.
Our program is running long, so we understand if parents and caretakers need to leave to